Hello and welcome to episode 126 of Tom's Hirschsprung's podcast. I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Laura. Laura, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me to share our Hirschsprung story.
Yeah, and what a story it is. I know we'll get into it. We'll get into it in a little bit, but yeah, this is not your typical diagnosed with Hirschsprung's and then everything sort of jogs along absolutely fine. There seems to be an
Yeah,
awful lot to this story. So with that being said, would you like to take us sort of, well, back to the very beginning?
yeah, absolutely. So, July 2023, I gave birth to my daughter Harriet, and had a really easy pregnancy. To be fair, like it was my first pregnancy, everything was really chill. Had no issues. Nothing came up on any scans that we had. There was no sign of any kind of trouble, so to speak. I was very, very overdue. So she did not arrive until I think 11 days after her due date. And I was in hospital 5 days prior to her being born because she was that stubborn that she just did not want to come out. They really tried everything and she just was having none of it. So eventually ended up in an emergency C-section. So obviously the lead up to the birth was all quite traumatic. There was a lot going on, lots of medical interventions. And obviously when you've not had a baby before, it's just very like, whoa, you know. But she arrived and she was gorgeous. She was tiny, but gorgeous. I think she was 6 pounds, 8 ounces, which is quite small for a very, very overdue baby. But all seemed fine, sort of those first few hours after birth. And then throughout the day, we were having difficulty feeding her. So anytime she had any like milk or colostrum, it just kept coming back up. And it was kind of like this like bright green colour. And a few of the paediatric doctors looked at her and just said, "Oh, it's just mucus from the C-section. You know, she'll be fine. It's just going to clear out." And I don't really remember a lot from that day because I was so out of it. I was so tired. And I just remember during the night the midwives taking her away for a little bit and trying to get her to feed on some formula, and it just wasn't happening. Anything that went in came straight back out. And she also hadn't passed any meconium at this point either. Um, so the next day, a new midwife came onto the ward. Hadn't seen her before. Her name was Jane. Um, and she kind of looked at what had happened overnight, and she said, "Something's not right here. Like I'm not happy." Um, and I overheard her actually on the phone speaking to, I guess, the pediatric registrar or something, saying, "You will send a different doctor to come and look at this baby because I'm not happy with the one that has looked at her before." So yeah, it was all a bit of a whirlwind. A different doctor came down and then immediately took her over to the special care baby unit. So this was at York Hospital, by the way, where she was born. So they don't have a NICU at York; they just have the special care baby unit. Um, and they took her, and we had no idea what was going on. And we waited for what felt like hours. And eventually, I got wheeled over to a special care baby unit, and they said there is something wrong with baby's intestines. We're not too sure what it is, but we can't treat it here. So Harriet was loaded up into this massive kind of like, I don't even know what you would call it. It was like a bed, but it was like a big kind of like machine almost. And they popped her in there for transport and took her over to Leeds General Infirmary. Um, Now at this point, I'm 36 hours on from an emergency section, not very mobile, not feeling great. But I said, "There's no way I'm staying in York. I'm going to Leeds, where my baby is." And the midwives were a bit like, "We don't think you're well enough to go." And I was like, "I don't care. I'm going." And I think they tried to do every test they could to kind of keep me there, but luckily everything came back where they kind of said, "Well, we can discharge you, but you need to take it easy." Um, so this was sort of like the evening by that point, and my husband drove us over to Leeds. So from York, that's about a 40-minute drive. It felt like the longest drive in the world after having major surgery. We got over to LGI, found Harriet. She was on the surgical newborn ward. And we got there and they said, look, we're not sure what it is, but we think it could be this thing called Hirschsprung's disease. Me and my husband are like, what is that? you know, we've never heard of it. It's not in our family. It's not something that we're familiar with. And I think that night, I think just all the emotions and the adrenaline, and because it was nighttime, we just didn't have a chance to speak to anybody about it or to understand, what Hirschsprung's was. And I just remember they put us in this little side room just off the ward. And my husband and I, we just cried because we just, we were so scared. We thought, were we going to lose her? We just had no idea what was about to begin, because that really was just the very start of it. And yeah, she was kept in LGI for I think about 2.5 weeks. She was put on bowel washouts to clear the stool out from her bowel, and basically it was just a case of getting her feeding and comfortable so that she could come home with us and we could continue to do the bowel washouts from home. So yeah, so that was just the start.
Yeah, I mean that sounds again, I can't imagine how people feel when you go in, and yes, I know you said Harriet was slightly overdue, but you go in and you sort of expect a normal, quote unquote, having had a normal pregnancy, and you expect a
Yeah,
normal birth,
absolutely.
then for just the entire world to be turned upside down. I mean,
Yeah,
I can't imagine
yeah.
how that must feel.
Absolutely. And, it really did feel like the whole thing just had turned completely upside down. And I think as well with kind of very new diagnoses, I think surgeons are quite reluctant to kind of have those realistic conversations with you at that point. So I remember kind of, having in my head that, oh, well, she would just have a bit of surgery and, everything would be hunky dory. And obviously, that wasn't the case. And I know now from, experience and seeing other people's stories that that isn't very often the case, that, it's surgery and then, everything's normal. And I don't like to use that word, but that's kind of, where we're at. So yeah, so we kind of went home and adjusted to life with bowel washouts. They were okay. She coped with them well. We coped with them okay. It's weird thing to do, but you just kind of get used to it, and that just becomes what's normal for you. But it did restrict us quite a lot. That we had to kind of plan. If we went anywhere, it would have to be around washouts. We couldn't, let other people look after her for any sort of extended period because they weren't trained in washouts. So, and it felt like quite an isolating experience, because how do you explain to your friends that have babies that this is something that you're doing? And I think both of us at the time probably didn't talk about it a lot, because we didn't know how. And I think people as well don't really know how to talk about it without feeling awkward. Um, so yeah, I think it was quite isolating in those early days, just overwhelming with all of a sudden having to A, care for a child just generally, and then B, all these additional things that you had to do. That made it even more complex. But we continued with the washouts until Harriet was about 3 months old. And one day the washouts just stopped working. We were getting no results from the bowel washouts. No stool was coming out, no gas. So we rang the stoma nurses at LGI. They said to bring her in. They'll have a little look. And basically, Harriet was just admitted until they could get a result from the washouts. But I think we were in for about a week, trying the washouts with the stoma nurses, with the surgeons there, trying to figure out what might be going on. And they couldn't figure it out. They thought it could be enterocolitis, but that there just wasn't enough kind of evidence to suggest what was going on. But Harriet was getting more poorly, obviously not being able to clear everything out. And so they scheduled her for an ileostomy. And then the morning that she was due to have the ileostomy, she tested positive for COVID. so, so they had to cancel the surgery. Obviously, with her being such a small baby, the anaesthetist was not prepared to continue, which is obviously the right decision. But at the time, we were just we'd gotten ourselves so geared up, for preparing for the surgery, and then it wasn't going to happen. And I also caught COVID at the same time. So we got isolated in this tiny little side room on the ward, just me and Harriet. Both had COVID, both feeling absolutely awful. It was a horrible experience. Definitely don't recommend it. But by some miracle, the washouts started working again. So I think the plan was to kind of delay the surgery until she was well. But it got to a point where we were back to regular washouts. The outcomes were as expected, and they were quite happy for her to be discharged back home. And we carried on as normal for another few months. And then at 6 months, she got very unwell again. And we took her in, and the surgeon just said, we need to put her into emergency surgery because, she's very sick, and it was enterocolitis, and it just makes the kids so unwell. And their best course of action was that, to kind of get the ileostomy done now, to prevent this kind of happening again. So she had the surgery, and she did really well. She recovered really quickly. I think we were admitted and discharged within about 7 days. And she was an absolute trooper. And we kind of noticed as her parents that once she'd had that surgery, she actually seemed a lot brighter. She just looked healthier. So I think, I still stand by it. It was the best thing that I think could have happened for Harriet at that time. And I think it was the right thing to do, just in terms of getting her to a point where she could be well, because these recurrent enterocolitis episodes were delaying her having a pull-through surgery, which is kind of what the goal that we were always working towards was.
Yeah, most definitely. And when the enterocolitis happened a second time,
Mm.
did you recognize the signs earlier that time?
Honestly, no. Um, and I think enterocolitis is so tricky because even the medical professionals themselves can't accurately diagnose it. They just kind of go on best guess. So they'll look at the x-rays, they'll look at, blood cultures, and they'll say it's likely enterocolitis. But, every child presents differently as well. So Harriet doesn't tend to get a temperature. She's never been a child that gets temperatures, but we spot signs like the vomiting. That's always one that she gets. And now that she has the ileostomy, the kind of watery output, those are kind of the key indicators that something's not quite right. But then, those are also the symptoms of so many other conditions and illnesses for children. So it's really difficult to know what you're dealing with. So we always just kind of act cautiously. And as soon as there's a sign of something not being quite right, we always contact the hospital, the stoma nurses, get some advice, and generally they say to bring her in.
Definitely. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean it's such a difficult condition, like you say. It's such a
Mm.
difficult condition to diagnose
Mm.
because it could be so many other things.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
many other things. And I guess one point that we'll touch on, that I can't remember if we mentioned yet already, but
Mm.
that Harriet is total colonic Hirschsprungs, but
Yeah,
that wasn't necessarily what they thought it was going to be originally. Is that right?
yeah. So we didn't find out that she was total colonic until she was about 9 months old, where she finally got to a point. The ileostomy was working super well for her. She was really healthy, really happy. She put on quite a bit of weight as well, and that was something that they'd always been a bit kind of cagey about. She was a small baby anyway, and she was slow to kind of grow any weight. But she got to the point where she was really healthy, and they said, "Okay, let's do the pull through. Let's see how it's going." And they took her down for surgery, and during the surgery, they biopsied her colon. And the way they do it at LGI is really weird because they have to take the biopsy, put it in a taxi and send it over to St. James's Hospital to their lab while she's like open for surgery and wait for them to call back with the results. So this went on for quite some time because they were back and forth between the two hospitals. And, you know, they said it's going to be a long surgery, just, you know, take some time off the ward, go out for the day. So my husband and I, you know, Leeds is a great city. We love it there. And we just sort of went on a bit of like a coffee shop tour. There's loads of good coffee shops. Obviously, we were so anxious, so we couldn't really enjoy ourselves, but we were just kind of like hopping around these coffee shops for a couple of hours. And then they called us, I think about lunchtime, and they said, we have stopped the surgery. Can you come back to the hospital and we'll explain what's going on? They said, Harriet's absolutely fine, but we can't continue. So, of course, obviously, our minds are just, we're just thinking, what on earth has happened? Because I don't think it ever occurred to us at that point that they wouldn't be able to do the pull through surgery. So we got back, surgeon sat us down and basically said, look, we have biopsied pretty much all her colon except for 5 centimetres, and none of it is viable. It's a ganglionic. And he said, I think we are looking at, you know, total colonic Hirschsprung's disease. And he said that wasn't what we expected because she'd had successful washouts for the most part, you know, for 6 months before the ileostomy. So it was kind of a shock to everybody. But I guess, you know, you don't know what you're dealing with until you get in there and you get the biopsies, and see what happens. So that really kind of floored us because we thought, well, what happens now? Where does that leave her? And basically, the plan was then to just keep the ileostomy as it is, work on getting the output to be a lot thicker, so that when they revisited pull through again a little bit later on, the when she has the pull through and the stoma reversed, the stool that comes out is going to be a little bit thicker and isn't going to cause as many issues, sort of like with the, you know, the nappy rash and things like that. So that was kind of where we left things when she was 9 months old. And then I would say the year after that, I could only describe as just absolute hell. um, we had so many issues initially with the ileostomy and leaks and not being able to find the right products, and just really struggling. You know, there'd be days where we would be doing 5 or 6 bag changes a day. And it would, you know, you'd put one on and then half an hour later it would go again, and you just think, oh my gosh, what are we doing wrong? Why is it not working? And obviously when you're sort of, you know, 9-month-old babies are, you know, a lot less docile than newborn babies. So that added an extra layer of kind of stress to it. And then pretty much like clockwork for the next year, every 3 months, Harriet got enterocolitis, even with the stoma. And well, they say enterocolitis. We don't know. It could have been tummy bugs. It's so hard to kind of tell exactly what they're dealing with. But she's always been treated, as somebody that has kind of chronic enterocolitis. And yeah, pretty much you could set your watch to it. You know, it would be 3 months and we'd be back in again, the vomiting, the diarrhea, etc. There was one time, October 2024, where she did have a tummy bug. And we know that because the rest of us caught it.
Okay.
So, so she was sick in hospital. I was with her, and got sick myself. I just have a memory of lying on, you know, like the little like pull out chair beds that they have in the hospital, lying on there, feeling absolutely awful and not being able to get up while a bunch of nurses were trying to sort Harriet's cannula out because she'd pulled it out. And you just think, oh my gosh, like what even is my life that this is happening? And the cherry on top of the cake was that we were actually trying to move house at this point. So we were relocating to Teesside. So we were packing all our stuff up in York, relocating to Teesside. My husband got sick, so had to pack up the entire house by himself because nobody could help him because obviously they would catch, you know, the bug. And it is one of those things, I look back on it now and obviously I can laugh, but you just think, how did we get through that? Because, you know, house moves are stressful at the best of times, but then, you know, you've got a toddler in hospital, everybody in the family's sick, nobody can help you pack your house up, and obviously you've got to move by a certain date. There's no extending it. So yeah, it was just total nightmare. That was probably like the worst hospital admission that we've had. And also, Harriet was really, really unwell at that point, to the point where she actually ended up going on TPN, because she'd lost so much weight from being poorly, that they had to get her onto the total parental nutrition, through a PIC line. So that was another surgery that she had to have, going under the general anaesthetic, to have the PIC line catheter inserted. And again, that was another kind of thing that we didn't really know about. So we didn't know anything about PIC lines or about TPN and how that worked. So it's like all these interventions that she's kind of had throughout her journey. I mean, it's great in some ways. I feel like we've learned a lot of lessons, but it's also a lot for, a child. She wasn't even 2 at this point, to go through, and that can be quite hard. Sort of remembering all that and thinking about, the pain that she must have been in, but not being able to communicate it, and for us as parents, being able to do very little about it. Yeah, that's like really, really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine so. I can imagine that's excuse me. I can imagine that's incredibly tough because you're almost got both hands tied together.
Yeah,
you can't do a great deal.
yeah,
Obviously you try and do like everything you can, but it must be yeah, it must be incredibly hard. But
mm,
on the subject you just said about the whole moving house and
mm,
having Harriet in hospital and sort of I hear this from a lot of parents who say, "Well, I have no idea how we got through it." Like
yeah,
I just, when you think of obstacles in life and you think, "Well, how on earth did we get through it?" And
yeah,
sometimes it's one of those things where actually you're a lot stronger than maybe you thought you were at the
yeah,
beginning.
100%,
Um,
absolutely,
and it's one of those where maybe like today when you look back at it and think, well, actually, how did we do that? But
yeah.
maybe at the time it was just, well, we'll just do X, Y, Z.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it was. I think as a parent anyway, you get this kind of newfound ability to just push through things. And then obviously when you kind of add medical complexities on top of that, you do kind of build this resilience and this ability to weather life's storms. And, in some ways I'm almost grateful to have had this experience because, it has made me a much stronger person. And I'm seeing it now in kind of the things that I'm doing in my life. It's given me a lot of strength. So for example, I work for a university and I do a bit of work with their healthcare team, and I do presentations about Harriet and talk about Hirschsprung's disease. And a few years ago, I would never have been able to stand up in front of 30 or 50 people and deliver a presentation, and now I can do that. So it's all these little ways in which that this journey has kind of strengthened myself and my husband. And I mean, Harriet is the strongest of us all, because I have to say nothing bothers that girl at all. She just gets on with life. She has the best life ever and has so much fun. And I really think that if you didn't know that she had Hirschsprung's, if you didn't know that she had the ileostomy, you wouldn't know a thing, because she's just so full of energy, full of life. And we are so fortunate that that is our experience of the day to day, because I know that for so many families that live with Hirschsprung's, that is not always the case. So while we've had a rough ride of things in terms of hospital admissions and sickness bugs and that sort of thing, we are very fortunate that our day to day life is at the moment much more settled.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really, really good to hear. Like you said, you end up being a lot stronger than you think you
Mm.
are. And it's great to hear as well that that you've done presentations and talked to
Yeah,
various
absolutely.
healthcare teams, which I think is absolutely fantastic because
Yeah,
above everything else, it gets more awareness out there.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
again, like you talk to a lot of healthcare professionals, and they can't know everything about everything, of course,
Mhm.
but there's a lot that still have no idea what. I mean, if you said the
Absolutely.
term Hirschsprung's disease, they probably wouldn't even know what part of the body it would be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And
So
we see that all the time. And for example, one of our local hospitals is James Cook Hospital in Middlesbrough, which is quite a big hospital. And it's quite a specialist hospital. But the paediatric staff there, the couple of times where Harriet has had to go, usually for things that aren't Hirschsprung's related, they have no idea what Hirschsprung's is. They don't even know anything about stomach care. It's it is very much kind of, certainly in my experience, I feel like it is really the children's hospitals, the specialist children's hospitals, that are the only places that are equipped to kind of deal with Hirschsprungs and everything that comes under that umbrella. Um, and for some people, we're quite lucky. Leeds, for us, we're still under Leeds, even though we live in Middlesbrough. Um, but for us, it's about, I don't know, an hour and a quarter in the car. Some people, their nearest children's hospital is 100 miles away, or 150 miles away, and to be able to get the care that they need, it's so much more complicated once you add distance as a factor. So it blows my mind a little bit that this is obviously, Hirschsprung's is quite rare, but it's not as rare as other kind of medical conditions that seem to be, people have a lot of knowledge of and understanding of. So I think being able to raise awareness about it and talk about it, I think is really important.
yeah, most definitely. I mean, just from my own experience in
Yeah.
terms of distance. I mean, I live in Suffolk, and
Mm.
my children's hospital that I went to was Great Ormond Street in London,
Wow. Yeah.
which is fairly far away,
Yeah.
even on the train. And going there once there every 3 months, 6 months throughout my
Yeah.
childhood, it's it is a fair old distance. So there are people who travel
Mm.
a lot further
Absolutely.
because you need that specialist care,
Mm.
and it's you need those you need those specialists. You know, the people that know
Yeah.
you and the people who know how to treat you, and I think that's really important. And just on the subject of awareness, as well, I know you're also a big part of a new charity, or
Mhm.
going to be charity soon, I think.
Not quite a charity yet, but yeah.
Going to be a charity soon,
Yeah.
of Hirschsprung's disease UK.
Yeah.
In terms of your kind of involvement and role within
Mm.
there, what do you do?
So I'm one of the trustees, and we work with our founder, Georgina. And at the minute, we're still trying to kind of figure out what we can do, and I guess what we would like to do. So for me, the kind of long term goal, I think, has always been about creating a network of Hirschsprung's families. Where I live in the northeast, there doesn't seem to be a great deal going on. And I know in some areas there's a bit more of a community, but in others there really isn't. I do think a lot of it is very dependent on where you live. For example, if you live sort of like Liverpool way and you're linked in with Alder Hey Hospital, there's probably a bit more going on for you than if you're based, up in Newcastle or Middlesbrough, like I am. So the long term for me would be to be able to kind of facilitate building those networks, working with the hospitals, the universities, tying everything in, and being able to create these kind of branches across the UK, to support families. I think it's a very lonely experience, going through the Hirschsprung's journey. And I think, at the time when we were kind of going through it initially, knowing that there was a place that I could go to, even if it was just a forum or, an online website where other people had had this experience, and you could kind of see people through different stages of it. So people that have babies with Hirschsprungs, people that have teenagers, and then adults with Hirschsprungs, kind of seeing how that journey can look for different people. I think that probably would have helped us a lot in terms of coming to terms with that diagnosis and understanding what that means. So that is kind of for me a big thing, and I think as well having a place for parents, to talk about the challenges of parenting a child with Hirschsprungs. I think we're sometimes, generally as parents, to say that, afraid to say that we're struggling and that things are really hard. And when for example, I'm in like a WhatsApp group with a bunch of mums, and all their kids, thankfully, are very healthy and happy. Um, and then, when I'm having a sort of like difficulty with Harriet's Hirschsprungs or something's happening, it's quite hard for me to kind of talk about it because I know they can't understand and I don't expect them to understand. But there isn't really anywhere else I can kind of get that out there. Um, so, I think being able to connect with other people, um, to know that you're not alone, I think that is a really, really important thing. And I would really like to be a big part of kind of building that up, you know, in future. And also for, children today that have Hirschsprungs, for them to be able to build networks and to meet people. Obviously, we're very lucky in this day and age that we have the internet, social media. It's easier than ever to connect with people all over the world. But I think having Hirschsprung's Disease UK as kind of like a central hub for that, people can find exactly what it is that they're looking for just in one place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially with it being UK centric as well, because there
Mm,
are
yeah.
certain things in the UK system that are,
Mhm.
excuse me, um, having interviewed people in South Africa, Canada,
Yeah,
China,
absolutely.
America, etc.
Yeah.
The healthcare system is completely different
Mhm.
wherever you go. So having something that is UK centric that you can talk to people within, I think will be
Yeah,
absolutely fantastic. I'm
definitely.
really looking forward to seeing how that progresses. And
Yeah.
as we sit here just now, I just received my little Hirschsprung's card, my little key ring as well. So
Yeah.
no, those came very promptly in the post. So yeah, no, it sounds fantastic. And also on the subject of being able to talk to other people who have Hirschsprung, whether they have Hirschsprungs or whether they are parents of a child with
Mm.
Hirschsprungs. I think that leads us on to sort of parental mental health, which I
Mm.
think is still an underexplored topic.
Yeah.
And I think having discussed this with a few people, not many, but a few people,
Mm.
I think it's something that is, I know that you wanted to talk about, and I think it's something that is incredibly important when it
Mm.
comes to not just Hirschsprung's, but having a child with a chronic condition. You know,
Mm.
like you said, you have a child diagnosed with a condition that nobody's ever heard of. Let's be
Mm.
honest,
Yeah.
um, and it's and suddenly you're going, well, what on earth can my child do? Are they going to be able to walk and talk and go to
Yeah.
school and play sports or anything like that?
Yeah.
Um, I guess, would you like to talk a little bit about your experience in that field?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always kind of said with our experience, I'm an open book insofar as how I feel and what my experience of things is. But obviously, I can't speak for Harriet, and I kind of don't want to kind of put things out there that, she can't really defend herself against, especially if she's a child. I think one of the things that's very difficult to talk about when it comes to the mental health of a parent of a child that has a chronic condition is that you almost feel like you can't really talk about it because it's your child that has the problem, it's your child that is having the surgeries, it's your child that is having the hundreds of cannula attempts and all those sorts of things. So you kind of feel a bit like, well, I can't make it about me and I can't fall apart now because it's not me that has the condition. But I think it takes such a toll because it's not just you know the diagnosis, it's everything that comes with it. It's the mental load of it. It's knowing the prescriptions, ordering the prescriptions, keeping track of hospital appointments, knowing, when your child is unwell and what you need to do, always having a backpack to go to hospital. It's all these things that you just do them because you have to. You have no choice. um, but it's still there. You're always thinking about what's the next thing going to be, and that is huge for anybody to take on. And it's not always going to be easy. And I think when you're in situations where your child's in hospital, you're not sleeping, you're not eating very well, you're not really being able to look after yourself, I think you absolutely are susceptible to experiencing poor mental health. And I think that it's not always picked up on or recognized, or in those situations, it can't really be focused on because obviously the priority is looking after the child that is unwell. But I've definitely, a couple of times when we've been admitted, experienced some really difficult mental health issues. I was very lucky in that LGI have something called a gastro psychologist that we work with, who is so lovely. And she kind of supports us as a family, and talks about what we're experiencing, how we feel about it, and what we can do to kind of, make the situation better. But I'm very acutely aware that that's not everyone's experience. And I think a lot of parents probably suffer in silence, um, and probably don't really know how to get out of things. So I think, with Hirschsprung's Disease UK, I think it would be great if we can kind of filter in a bit of support for parental mental health and look at how we can improve our mental health even when we are faced with incredibly difficult situations. But ultimately, you can't look after anybody until you can look after yourself. And I think certainly in the last year, we've been very lucky that things have kind of been a bit easier for us. Harriet's not been in hospital as much. We have, a relatively okay day to day life. That's given me a bit of breathing room to kind of think about, okay, well, how can I improve my mental health? How can I deal with situations better? But obviously, that isn't always the case. People don't get that break. So I think having a bit more, certainly in the hospitals as well, just a bit more kind of integrated support for parents, I think would really be invaluable, because it is really hard. And like I said, not every day is going to be an easy day. And it's not always possible to think, well, I'm lucky because things could be worse. It's you get very bogged down in the situation that you're in. So yeah, and that can be, extraordinarily tough, and it feels like nobody really gets it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's good to know that there is a gastro psychologist. I'd never heard of
Mm.
that term before.
I'd never heard of it either. But yeah, that's what she
That's
is. Yeah.
that's really, really good to hear.
Mm.
Because the links as well, having read a lot of papers as I have, the links
Mm.
between gastro health and mental health
Mm.
are huge, or gastro health
Yes.
and brain health
Yeah.
are massive. So I guess we are possibly more susceptible having a stomach
Mm.
condition to other issues as well.
Mm.
But that's really, really good to hear. And like you say, everybody is different when it comes
Mm.
to having a chronic condition or being a parent of a child with a chronic condition.
Mm.
So I guess it's quite difficult to have a sort of one size fits all approach.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's always going to be a challenge. I mean, like, how many different types of Hirschsprungs do we have? Ultra short segment, long segment, total colonic. And within that, every child, experiences it differently. So, and then every parent experiences differently. Some families have absolutely brilliant support, other families don't. And I think being able to kind of deal with that inequality and make it a bit more kind of, you know, even across the board would go a long way, in supporting families, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And just on that point of how many do we have, I think it's six. However, I've just seen, I've been doing little bit of research and talking
Yeah.
to various parents with TCHD, total colonic,
Mm.
and then there's a little plus signal at the other plus
Yeah.
sign, sorry, at the end of it. And that
Yeah.
plus can mean loads of different things. So now my six Hirschsprungs that I put up
Yeah.
a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
I now think there's loads more. So I need to do some
Yeah.
research before I start posting that again. But yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. There's so many other conditions and potential sort of side
Mm.
effects that come with Hirschsprungs. And just as we wrap up, I know you talked about how well Harriet's getting on
Mm,
at the moment. That's so good to hear that you haven't,
mm.
again, touch wood,
Yeah.
had any admissions for a while. But what do you see for her in the future?
So where we're at with our journey at the moment is that because she's kind of doing so well with her ileostomy and hasn't had any kind of significant illnesses for a while, is just to kind of keep things as is. It may be the case that they, offer pull through surgery using her, the tiny bit of, colon that she's got left and the small intestine to do a pull through. Um, Me personally and my husband personally, our view is that because she has a reasonably good quality of life at the moment, we're not really prepared to kind of put her through that surgery. Just because I think there are just probably just too many risks in terms of what the outcomes are for her. And that's at the moment that is our choice. And we've been very lucky that our the surgeons and the stoma nurses have worked with us and kind of not really pushed us one way or the other. And we felt like we've been listened to in terms of making that argument for keeping things as they are. Whether when Harriet is a little bit older and has a bit more understanding of things, she, wants to have a bit more input on that decision, then, it's her body. That's her choice to make. I think as parents, we're always going to kind of hope that she doesn't kind of put herself through that, but being able to understand it's not really going to be our decision forever. And I mean, that's another thing that, we kind of carry the, not the burden, but the load of as parents of children with this condition is that you're making these decisions for them. And, one day we're going to have to explain to her why she has a stoma and, why we didn't put her through a surgery and, all these kind of tricky conversations that one day we will have to pick up. That's a huge kind of load to carry as a parent. And we just kind of, with Harriet, even though she's only just coming up to 3, try to explain to her, she's got Hirschsprungs, she has a stoma, but she's so happy and healthy, and that's what makes her happy and healthy. And she's very interested in her stoma as well. She always likes to see what we're doing when we do bag changes. She wants to get involved. So I think for us, it's just about kind of building her own self confidence as she grows up and goes through life. But yeah, like I said, she's just absolutely full of energy, and I think she's probably going to be quite sporty. So fingers crossed, she kind of finds a way to balance that with the ileostomy, or if she ever does go through surgery, to be able to just keep on being herself. This condition doesn't define her. It's just a part of who she is.
Absolutely, no, well said, well said. But I no, thank you so much for coming
No
on
problem.
and all obviously all the work that you do with Hirschsprung's UK. Wish you all the success with that as well.
Thank you.
And obviously wishing all the best for Harriet, for you and the rest of the family. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you
on.
so much. Thank you.